We've talked earlier today about Chesham and Amersham. It was never a race that Labour expected to win, but they still had a pretty shocking night, losing their deposit. Let's talk about that result and more with Shadow Community Secretary Steve Reid. Steve Reid, the constituency Labour Party in Chesham and Amersham has 629 followers on its Facebook page. Your candidate got 622 votes. What happened to the other 7?
Well, let's give voters some credit here, Trevor, because what I think happened is that voters took their own decisions about the best way to defeat the Conservative candidate in that by-election. So Labour voters lent their support to the Liberal Democrat who was best positioned. That's never been a seat where Labour's been competitive. It's never been a seat where Labour's done particularly well. And, voters took their own decisions and they defeated Boris Johnson. And they defeated him for very good reasons as well.
But it's pretty grim, isn't it? I mean, this is a seat, 55% Remain, 40%, I think, graduates. It's a sort of place that Labour should be doing well and needs to do well if it's going to compete for government again. Isn't it worrying that you can't compete in this area?
If you look across what happened in the local elections in the south of England just a few weeks ago, Labour won the mayoralty of the west of England, and we picked up seats in Hertfordshire, we picked up seats in Sussex, we were increasing our vote in Kent. Labour is doing well across the blue wall. In this particular seat, it was the Liberal Democrats who were competitive. Now, in a general election, there will be only 2 alternatives for Prime Minister, Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer. So things may look differently then. As things were on Thursday, the Liberal Democrats were best placed to defeat the Conservatives, and Labour voters backed the Lib Dem in order to get the Tory out. And one of the reasons for that was the hugely unpopular planning reforms that the government is bringing forward to deprive local people of any say over developments on their own street and in their own neighbourhood. So, there is a growing coalition across this country intent on stopping the Conservatives from continuing on the path they're going along about this country's future.
I want to come to the planning issue because that's an area that I know you are expert in. But let's just talk about the politics of this for another minute or so. Did I understand from what you've just said that, however informal, however unspoken, you think that the possibility of essentially an anti-Tory alliance exists that would see the different parties, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Scottish National Party, essentially combining to get the Tories out?
Well, I didn't mean to imply that at all, Trevor. I'm not myself attracted. You're talking fundamentally about what's called the Progressive Alliance, so-called, and I'm not attracted at all to the idea of politicians trying to stitch up the choices available to voters in their own localities. Voters are smart. Voters will take their own decision, and in Chesham and Amersham, they took the decision they took, and in the west of England they took a different decision. The key for Labour is to win a majority across the country. The blue wall is clearly crumbling now, but we saw in Hartlepool the Labour Party is having problems still in some parts of former industrial areas in different parts of the country. We need to build out now a policy and a programme that has broad reach across the whole of the country to secure the election of a Labour majority government. That is what we are focused on, not stitching up deals with other parties to deprive voters of choice.
So for you, it's a Labour majority or nothing. No alliances with the SNP, no understandings with the Liberal Democrats.
Well, this is, it's in the hands of the voters rather than me how they choose to vote. But what Keir is doing at the moment, and we've seen the changes he's started to bring in over the last few weeks, is gearing the Labour Party up to the next general election. He's appointed Annalisa Dodds to head up a policy review. Our intention is to build a policy platform attractive enough to win support from across the country for a majority Labour government that can bring our party back together after a decade in which the Conservatives have pulled our country apart and made us weaker, both domestically and on the world stage.
Well, let's address policy. You said that the planning issue was a major question in Chesham and Amersham. Will Labour support the government's plans to streamline the planning system and to make it easier to build homes and harder for people to object to new developments?
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, we've called a vote in the Commons tomorrow on some of what's going on here. And what the Conservatives are up to is they've got a flagship piece of legislation that they're bringing forward as part of their new legislative programme. And what it does, it takes away the rights of local people and local communities to object to developments that may be happening in their localities. Power is shifted from elected councils and their planning committees to development boards that are appointed by Conservative ministers in Whitehall. Those development boards then zone your locality either for protection or for growth. If you're zoned for growth, then planning applications are deemed accepted. And even if you're going to see a development on a green space like the one I'm standing on now or on the street where you live, you as a resident lose the right to have a say and to object to that application. This is a significant reduction in people's rights. And the reason the Conservatives are doing this is because under Boris Johnson's leadership, donations to the Conservative Party from major developers have gone up by 400%. So the Conservatives are paying back developers by selling out communities and depriving communities of the right to a say over developments on their own street. Now, we're calling a vote tomorrow in the House of Commons to guarantee the right of residents to object. And those Conservative MPs who have stood up in the chamber so far and said they don't like this, well, put your money where your mouth is, because there's a vote tomorrow and you can vote with us to protect residents' rights.
Isn't the outcome of all of that that essentially Labour is lining up with the NIMBYs who say we don't want new development in our backyard, even if that means that young people who want to buy homes, there will be no homes available for them? Isn't that the outcome of what you've just said?
There's 2 points here, Trevor, and I've got experience of this myself. I used to chair a regeneration board that brought forward 5,000 new homes. The best development happens when developers, local councils and communities work together. It doesn't work well when all the power is in the hands of the developers and everybody else is silenced from having a say. But if you want to look at what the real problem is in this country that is stopping homes being built, it's not the planning system that the government is trying to change. Because over the last 10 years, 1 million homes have been given consent to be built, but were never built. The problem isn't the planning system. The problem is developers not then going ahead and building them. And the reason some developers do that is land that has a planning consent on it becomes more valuable, and some developers will sit on that land, wait for the land values to rise, and then seek to make a profit by selling it on without building the homes. What we need are better incentives to help developers go ahead and build the homes once they've got consent, not putting a gag around local people's mouths so they can't have a say about what happens on the street where they live or the community that they're part of.
Steve Reed, thank you for your clarity this morning.